Hello again, folks. Martin Lehner here from Orange Technology. And in this video, it's actually going to be a follow-up to the video beforehand where I was talking about certifications. And in this video, I want to talk about being able to use your certifications. So this is a completely different issue, a little more unique. So in the previous video, I talked about certifications. Are they useful? Are they worth doing? Blah, 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 right? Again, not to rehash the previous video again, but basically, certifications I don't believe they're a bad thing, but they're also, in some circumstances, they're very situational. In many circumstances, it depends where you're at, right? If you're working in the technology industry and you're trying to get into this particular niche and you need to get some very specific training for it, hey, maybe it makes sense. If you are not in the field, not working in the field, never worked in the field, and you are looking to get your A+, and then you're going to get a job, that's not going to work, right? Bottom line, it's just not going to work. Anyways, watch my last video if you didn't watch my last video. You'll hear me talk about that for a while. In this video, however, I want to talk about being able to use your certification. So 2 years ago, I took a course called Certified Disaster Recovery Engineer, CDRE, from a company called Mile2. It's actually a good course. I very much enjoyed it. It's actually quite useful for disaster recovery, for planning. There's actually a lot of business in it. So in the course, they talk about a lot of the business aspects of disaster recovery for data and why the business aspects have an impact on how you design your disaster recovery plan. Actually a really good course. I don't have any bad things to say about the course. Other than it's a little expensive. It's a little expensive. Luckily, I got some federal training dollars from the government in order to be able to pay for the course. So they paid for part of it, which made it a lot better. But that being said, I mean it is what it is, right? What I will say is be careful with the designations you get at the end of it. So I have that designation, CDRE, Certified Disaster Recovery Engineer. I have a certificate of completion. I have the certification. You can go on Mile2's website, mile2.com. There's a link kind of halfway down the page. It says Find Certified Students. Plug in my last name, Lehner, and you will find me. And it will show that I am certified as a certified disaster recovery engineer. Okay, so I started using the title, right? I don't use it everywhere, but I mean I have said, I am a certified disaster recovery engineer. I am a certified information systems security officer, CISO. That's another Mile2 certification that I've taken. I've just used these in passing when situations have arisen where it made sense to use them. And it was interesting because I got a cease and desist request from the Association of Professional Engineers of the Yukon. So that's the area where I live. And it was interesting because they said you can't use the term engineer, right? Because you're misrepresenting yourself as a professional engineer. So the association, the professional engineering associations have basically a copyright, a trademark on the term P.ENG, professional engineer, right? So if you see somebody's name and there's a P.ENG at the end of it, it means they are a member of the Association of Professional Engineers. That is a regulatory body. They actually have legislation, so it's an act that enables them to be able to run this licensed profession, right? And there's laws within this act and regulations about being a professional engineer. It's not a joke, right? Like these are people that build bridges, they They deal with infrastructure. They deal with things that if they don't know what they're doing, it can kill people, right? So it makes sense to have them as a certifying body, as a licensed profession, right? So they have this licensed profession, and they argued that that I'm not allowed to use the term engineer. Now that's interesting because they don't actually, as far as I can tell, as far as I could tell, they did not have a copyright on the word engineer. The word engineer is just, it's a term in the dictionary, right? It's like, it's actually like accountant, right? You can call yourself an accountant. You can't call yourself a chartered accountant. That is a licensed profession, a CA, C.A. That you can't do. But I mean, again, there's no copyright on the word engineer, just like there's no copyright on the word, you know, plumber. There's no copyright on the word builder, right? If you want to build building, or you know, constructing, maybe not build a building, but construct things, make a deck or something like that. You know, these are not copyrighted terms, right? Again, nurse. You can be a nurse without being a registered nurse, an RN, right? Because an RN is a licensed profession. LPN, licensed practical nurse, also licensed profession. But I mean, you can be a nurse in a seniors facility, right? Where you just take care of, you know, seniors or disabled people, and you can call yourself a nurse. There's nothing that says you can't. So anyways, they sent this cease and desist letter and said, I can't use this term because I'm not a registered member of the association. If I qualify, I should register. Okay. So I said, oh, hey, I have no problem with that. I'm not trying to represent that I'm a professional engineer by any means. I am not a professional engineer. I do not have the education required for it. I do not have the university degree for it. I've not gone through engineering school. Okay. So I am not a professional engineer. I am not trying to tell anybody I am. I'm not. So no problem. That being said, I'm just trying to get some clarity, and the person I was dealing with was actually very polite, and I was polite back. Is, you know, I don't think they were trying to be adversarial about it. You know, I mean, they're a licensed association, right? I mean, that's the whole point of being licensed is, you know, you want to make sure people aren't going around misrepresenting themselves. That's fine. I have no problem with that, right? So I went back to the person and I said, look, I have this certification, you know, certified disaster recovery engineer. That's all I'm telling people I have. And I have it. It's here. You can verify this. Are you saying I can't use this? And they basically came back and said, well, you can use it, but you need to change engineer to expert. So you can be a certified disaster recovery expert. I said, but that's not the certification I paid for, right? Like, I paid for the training. I paid to take the exam. I paid for this certification. If it said expert, I may not have paid for it. I mean, I probably would have in my case. But the point is, I bought this certification based on what was presented to me at the time. For this amount of money, you will get this. And I agreed, right? So I want to be able to use that. And they basically said, no, you can't. Okay, so, and this is where it gets a little funny because I have this certification, right? I have it. This is what it says. So I actually contacted the Mile 2 folks, and the Mile 2 folks said, yeah, those guys, they don't really understand, and they're just trying to strong arm you, you know. Basically, I was actually told, tell them to screw off and go away. Interesting. I'm not sure what would happen. I mean, I understand from the association's perspective, they want to protect the term, right? They want to protect the professional engineer designation. Would they sue me over it? Maybe they would. I'm not sure, right? But again, this is one of these things with globalization, right? Here locally, you probably wouldn't get our, you know, post-secondary education body, the college we have. You probably wouldn't get them offering an engineering program with an engineering degree, because the association would probably say, well, you can't do an engineering degree because, you know, you need to be licensed with us in order to do that. So because the college here is within the jurisdiction of the governing body, they probably would work together, and if not, there would, you know, probably be some step in from the government who makes the Engineering Act and has that body of legislation, right? So that's that. Now, if you go across the country, every province and territory in Canada has the same thing. They have the Association of Professional Engineers. So, even if, let's say, you went to a different province and took, a course, it's going to be pretty much the same thing as if you did it here because they have their own regulatory body there. Now, this is something with globalization, right? And again, and the internet and globalization and the advent of technology is Mile 2 is based in Florida, right? They're handing this stuff out of Florida, and they're handing out internationally, right? They don't care if you're in the Czech Republic, they don't care if you're in Russia, they don't care if you're in China, Canada, whatever. They'll give you the certification if you pay for it. So it's one of these things. They've issued a certification, and I'm assuming in their jurisdiction, they're allowed to hand that certification out. If they're not, I'm sure they would have been shut down by now. I know they've been around for a number of years already because I did my first course several years ago. So, I mean, they've been around for a few years. If they were doing something illegal, they'd have been shut down by now, right? Somebody would have complained. Now, so they're handing out a certification that is completely legal in their area. They can use the term, it's obviously not a problem. In my area, it's being argued, maybe correctly, maybe not correctly. That's a question, right? But it's being argued that I'm not allowed to use that term. But I have the certification. So this is one of these weird things, right? They're allowed to give me the certification. I have it. I'm not lying about having it. But I'm being told I'm not allowed to use it and I have to change it. Which, am I allowed to change it? Like, am I allowed to change engineer to expert? Because what I have from Mile 2 says certified disaster recovery engineer. If I'm not allowed to use the word engineer, am I allowed to change it to expert? Is that okay to do, or am I then misrepresenting what I have from Mile 2? Right? So I mean, it's these questions, and it's interesting because my personal opinion is I think the association's overstepping their reach. Again, I have that title. I can use that title. I believe they have the ability to prevent someone from using the professional engineers designation. I don't believe they have a copyright on the word engineer. Again, I could be wrong. I could absolutely be wrong. I'm not a lawyer. I do know a bit about law, but I'm not a lawyer. So I could absolutely be wrong. But my opinion, just from looking at the legislation and the regulations, is they're very specific. They have the professional engineer's designation. If I'm not trying to misrepresent myself as a professional engineer, I think I'm in the green. Anyways, what wound up happening, the problem that had happened was one of the newspapers had actually printed that as my title. So I actually my actual title is general manager of the company. The certifications are just kind of, part of my resume. So we kind of just left it at that, right? We never really went any further. And it's interesting because I also think this is one of these things where, this particular association, and I think this will be true for many associations, they just haven't ever dealt with this before, right? I mean, globalization and the internet hasn't been around for 50 years. I mean, these professional designations have been around a long time, right? I mean, they've been around for decades and decades. And, this kind of stuff like online education and the ability to get a certification and stuff online, again, the internet in the 90s was growing, but you didn't really do education on it. In the 2000s is kind of where education started to take a foothold, the whole distance thing. But I would argue, it's been in the last decade at the most where we've really seen an explosion in these kind of online schools and online diplomas and certifications and all this kind of stuff, right? So based on that, they just haven't ever run into it before. So they're acting the same way they would act if somebody, was pretending they had a designation, or, somebody went to engineering school in Venezuela and then came up here and said, I am an engineer, right? And they go, oh, hang on. If you want to be, you have to register with us, right? If you want to be a professional engineer, that's cool, right? But you have to register with us and you have to meet the qualifications. And that's fine, right? the way they're approaching it makes sense for that. But this is something completely different, and my opinion would be they just never run into this before, and they don't know how to deal with it. So they're dealing with it the same way they would deal with, again, somebody that went to engineering school in another country and came here and just said they were an engineer. They're dealing with it the same way, but it's not really the same thing, right? So it's interesting because I mean, if I were to think of it from the association level, I would almost create a completely separate designation for things like this, and then have people pay those membership fees to get, that specific designation. So it's not a professional engineer, just the straight PEng designation, but it's like, well, they have one. It's called a limited license, LLE, limited license engineer or something, and that's for very specific things. But I would even drill it down further, like maybe you're I don't know, maybe you're a limited technology engineer or something like that, right? Just have something different that people could apply to who don't need a general engineering designation, but they have these particular certifications where, they could license themselves, right? And I mean, that would be good for the association. They have a bigger membership. Again, it puts a little bit of regulation in, I guess. I mean, again, IT, technology is an unregulated industry. We don't have certifying bodies. We don't have legislation. We don't have acts. We don't have regulations. None of that stuff, right? We don't have licensing. Maybe this is a way to kind of start that kind of thing where you start doing some licensing. I'm not sure. But anyways, I want to be very clear. I don't think that the association is a bunch of assholes or something. It's absolutely not that. I think they just didn't, they'd never seen this before, they'd never come across this before, and they were dealing with it the best way they could, which is the way that they've been dealing with things like this, in how they've been dealing with other similar issues in the past, but not the same kind of situation. And so really, I don't fault them at all. They were very good to deal with. There was no issues there. We had dialogue back and forth. It was respectful. It wasn't adversarial or anything by any means. I do want to make that really clear. But again, that's something to think about. Is, are you allowed to use the designation that you're doing, right? I mean, are you able to use it in your area, right? And this is one of those funny things you never really think about, right? I mean, again, the Mile 2 guys told me to tell these guys to take a hike. Well, of course they're going to tell me that because they want to sell their course, right? I mean, I understand their stance on it, right? They have to protect their course and what they're selling. If what they're selling can't be used, or you're not legally allowed to use it, why would you ever buy it, right? So I understand their stance, but again, this is something for you guys to think about: is can you use your designation where you want to use it, right? I mean, again, this one, like MCSE, Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer. Again, I mean, I'm pretty sure Microsoft did their homework before they started handing those out, right? But it's one of these things where when we talk about certifications and we talk about education, it's very situational. Can you use it? Can you, does it apply to you and your situation in what you're doing? That's one of the things you really need to be thinking about. And that's why I'm so leery on just blanket certifications and just going after that before going after experience or anything like that. Again, if you are a licensed person, if you want to become a professional engineer, you want to build bridges, yes. Engineering school, you take your exams, you pass, you apply to become a licensed engineer, professional engineer, you get that PEng designation at the end of your name, and you are an engineer. Yes, you must do the education. You cannot just go and become an engineer without doing the education and going through the certifying bodies. It's just how it is, right? Same with the doctor, same with the dentist, same with the lawyer, all this stuff, right? Those regulated professions, absolutely. But again, technology is not a regulated profession. It is not a licensed profession. You can go and you can start deploying servers tomorrow with no credentials, no education, and you basically cannot get, nobody can sue you for doing that without the education, right? Again, experience, experience, experience. I always say education is important. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm not saying it's not worth doing, but experience trumps it every time. If you have both, that's the best. Again, education, you're down here. If all you have is education, you're down here. If all you have is experience, you're up here. And if you have both, you're up here. You're above both, way above both, if you have both education and experience. But again, when you're looking at certifications, you need to think about which ones you're doing, which ones make sense, and again, whether you can use them, right? Again, in this particular case, I do believe I can use it. I believe it's just a misunderstanding. Again, it's something new they haven't had to deal with before. It just is what it is. But, you know, that being said, it is something to think about. And you have to think about your education. You can't just start, you know, don't start doing the A+ just because somebody said to do the A+, or somebody else is doing it and yeah, it makes sense for you to do. No. Look at what